2023 is officially over, and this is a video I've kind of wanted to make for a while. These are the books that I feel very comfortable recommending. These are the books that I think anybody could enjoy, and I think that most people could to gain something by reading. Obviously, to start with, this stuff that has nothing to do with training knowledge, the stuff that's just for personal enjoyment of reading. There's this one, Quentin Tarantino, Cinema Speculation. I like Quentin Tarantino movies anyway. If you don't like his movies, then maybe that's different. But the thing is even if you're not a fan of Quentin Tarantino movies, he has this weird encyclopedic knowledge of movies and Hollywood and the history of that business. And it's very hard to describe everything he goes into with this book, but it's unbelievably satisfying. It feels like you have this front row view to the whole history of Hollywood, all the back doors, all the stories you never heard about, the stuff that's never talked about, the behind the scenes stuff. And this isn't based on his speculation, even though it's called Cinema Speculation. Some of it's speculation, but a lot of this is based off of him actually having personal conversations with some of these old directors or whatever else. But Cinema Speculation, I have probably read this book 4 or 5 times now. I've read both this physical copy and I've listened to audiobook a bunch. If you are into this type of stuff, I would recommend this book. It is very, very enjoyable. The next two are going to be very controversial. This guy somehow, astonishingly, has become a controversial figure and has become a political figure, even though he hasn't meant to. It's just, that's the world we live in. The first of the two is Jordan Peterson, 12 Rules for Life. Just a good book. Just the information, what he talks about, anecdotes from his own life, things he learned when he was going through his degree process, when he would visit some of these institutions and speak with some of the patients, and stories. He'll reference Bible stories and talk about our own history and our concepts as humans, our natural concepts and ideas of hierarchy or of whatever else. It's so unbelievably thorough, and some of it's actually heartbreaking. I remember while reading this book, and then later again, even more so when I listened to the audiobook version, I actually became very emotional. There was one particular part of this book that I'm never going to forget. And I don't even know if it was meant to be sad so much as it was just illustrating something. But I empathized with what I was reading to the point that it really shook me emotionally. This is a very, very good book, and I've sent this to several people. I sent it to my dad. I sent it to other people. I know books are out of fashion. People don't like reading these days, but this is really a very good book, and it's very highly recommended. And because I liked this one so much, and I have read it multiple times, that I got this one, Beyond Order. Now, I only showed this in addition. I cannot talk as much about this. I don't understand this book as well. I've read through it one time. Typically, I'll have to read through something and think about it and contemplate for a while, and I'll go back and I'll read it again. And of course, the more I read, the better I understand it, and the more I feel like it's kind of part of my mind and my thought process, and I can navigate it better. I haven't gone through that whole process with this book. I've read it through one time, and I enjoyed it. And I will say that based on my limited knowledge, I'm not as familiar with this one. I feel like it's not as good. It's not as groundbreaking as this book, but it is the book that comes after the first one. This is Jordan Peterson, Beyond Order, and you might want to check out this one too, but again, I can't say as much about this. Now, to move on from there, I loved this book. This is called The Wanderer's Havamal. This is by Jackson Crawford. I'm a big fan of anything related to Vikings, which I almost hate to say because I have this weird aversion where I hate doing anything that has become trendy. Even if I've been doing it for years, as soon as it becomes trendy and everyone's doing it, I kind of don't want to do it anymore. And that's not a good thing. That has bit me a few times, but the Viking thing took off in more recent popular culture, but my entire life I have been fascinated with the Vikings, and I've read about them, and it's always bothered me the way that they're improperly portrayed in most media. But I have never never. I've. This is Jackson Crawford, by the way, who wrote this book. I think I've read. I'll know for sure here when I look at this list here. I've probably read at least 3 of his books, maybe more. I can't remember even how many he's written total, but he has an unbelievably good understanding of Norse mythology, and he reads it, he translates it, he's it's just his it's really hard to describe. This guy, I've never read from anybody else on this subject. I've never come across anybody who understands these people from this time period as well as he seems to. And he doesn't even act like he's so much of an expert. That's one of the great things. He's very, very humble. He openly points out and admits when there are just holes in our knowledge and certain things we don't understand, and it's speculation and we don't know for sure. But the Havamal specifically, let me see if I can. I'm not going to read this whole thing for you, but I'll read the entrance here. This small part of the entry. Havamal, words of the High One, purportedly delivering the wisdom of Odin in his own voice, is one of the most important mythological poems of the Poetic Edda, and simply the most important witness to early Norse cultural ethics. What's amazing is I've read the Poetic Edda, and of course the Havamal. One of the things, especially with his more modern interpretations, like if he has one called the Cowboys Havamal, and he puts that in kind of like modern day kind of Western dialect, it's amazing. Like it's really astonishing. You have no idea just how relevant old Viking wisdom is to modern day life until you've read these books. So much stuff people try to act like, oh, it's so relevant, but you have to bend over backwards and flip things upside down and really look at something sideways with one eye squinting really tight at a funny angle to kind of make the connection. That's not true with this stuff. Those old sayings, that folk wisdom, right? These books are basically the Norse version of that. It's all this, just these small stories or small sayings passed down apparently by Odin, that are supposed to help guide you in your life. And as you read these things translated into English, it's actually astonishing. It's not just kind of cool. I can't tell how many times I would actually have to put the book down and like take a and I'd really have to think about it. Like, wait a minute. And I read it again. Like, it's astonishing how absolutely relevant this stuff is. I I wish I had a better vocabulary. I wish I was a wordsmith. It's astonishing. This old Norse wisdom is very, very good, and I highly recommend it. Whoever you are, it doesn't matter if you like Vikings or not. It doesn't matter where you get your wisdom, what you think, what your political affiliation, what your religion. It doesn't matter. This stuff is really, really good. It's very, very good. I can't recommend it enough. The next, again, this is a book I recommended to several people. I've read this probably 11 or 12 times, and I have the ebook and I have the audiobook. This is called Shop Class as Soulcraft. And all I can say is that while reading this book, not only is every bit of it so enjoyable, and I can empathize with every single word this guy is saying. But I mean, this is one of those things where when I read this book, it feels like I'm reading something that a future version of me has written. That's how much I connect with everything he's saying. It's so unbelievably good. This is one of my top 3 or top 5 favorite books that I can think of ever, maybe. And it's one that I will continue to read in 2024. And I wish everybody read this. This is something that one of those few things that I think society as a whole, entire nations, would do better if this was required reading in schools. Like this is thoroughly good. So Shop Class as Soulcraft, I cannot recommend it enough. Again, I've not only recommended it to a bunch of people who have all liked it, Every review I've ever seen has been positive, and I have bought this. I bought additional copies of this. I have not only bought myself a copy, and I have the audiobook, and I have the ebook. I have purchased additional copies just to send to people to make sure that they have a copy of it. Very, very good. I'm not going to stay long on this one. I did a whole dedicated video to this on my other channel, but this is called Why We Sleep. Matthew Walker, PhD. This is Why We Sleep, Unlocking the Power of Sleep and Dreams. The unfortunate thing about this book is that this is the name. You read something like Unlocking the Power of Sleep and Dreams, and you think it has something to do with astrology and crystals and hippie stuff. Not at all. This is an unbelievably dense, well-written, well thought out, thorough, just 100%. I wish, again, everybody would read something like this. This is not as enjoyable to read as some of these other books. Many times, even while reading this book, I found myself kind of starting to feel anxious. It's not something you read just for fun, because it's just so fun to read. But the information in it is very, very good. It's very hard to find anywhere else. This quite literally, this replaces, you could spend 30 or 40 years reading all the different research studies, all the different meta-analysis, all the different statistics and facts and figures, and looking for stories and listening to anecdotal this, and you still would not have as thorough a understanding of this subject and why, just how unbelievably important sleep is. Quality sleep. I can't stress it enough. Probably, and what's crazy is only after I've read this did I suddenly start to realize how much other things I've read in other books that has to do with proper training, proper diet, overall health, all-cause mortality, things like that, accidentally overlap perfectly with what's reading it. Like, oh, it's all connected. It all makes sense. If I'm really, even just from a health standpoint, like general basic cosmetic stuff, if you are wanting the most powerful way to improve your health, reduce your risk of all-cause mortality, not age is bad, just improve your blood work, lose more body fat, gain more muscle, everything. There's so much information. It's all trying to come out at once. Just I would say I would very highly recommend this book. The book itself is amazing. Highly recommended. It quite literally might change your life for the better. And then Mike Tyson, New York Times bestseller, Iron Ambition, My Life with Customato. This is another one that I have the physical book. I've got the ebook, and I have the audiobook. I've read this 5 or 6 times. The first time I read this, I was actually a little bummed out. I found myself, it was like a roller coaster. It started out so good. And then about maybe a quarter of the way through or halfway through, I found myself wondering why we're spending so much time talking about boxing in general and Customato and his early life and the things he went through. I was actually getting annoyed. Like, I thought this was going to be more about Mike Tyson. And then by the time the book ended, it all made sense. I'm so happy that he was talking about all that. It was just thoroughly enjoyable. Like, you know how sometimes you'll see an old interview, like it was an interview done with somebody 100 years ago, or 100 years ago with very early technology. They were using an old camera and old microphones to interview an old person who 100 years ago was already 90 years old. And they're talking about what it was like through the 1800s and the Civil War and all this stuff. And when we see these interviews now, we say, it feels like we struck gold. It's, oh, wow, like this is priceless. This information that's being passed down. To hear this firsthand account of what things were really like is astonishing. That's how this book feels. The number of topics that are covered, the things that are discussed, the stories that you get insight into, just, it is so thoroughly satisfying. It is so good. And it makes you really, it just gives you such an appreciation for so much of everything. It's just highly, highly recommended. Even if you're not a boxing fan, it doesn't matter. The story is amazing. Now, there are some other physical books up there that I didn't bring down because they just didn't make the list. I've read them and I like them. They're great books, but I don't find myself reading them as many times over and over again as these books here. Before I show you these ones that are more fitting to this channel because they have to do with training, I will quickly check out my online list. These are books that I want physical copies of, but I can't seem to get physical copies of. Not yet anyway. One is called The World of Yesterday, Memoirs of a European. This was by Stefan Zweig. And it's amazing. I would highly recommend that. Let me see. Another one, God, this one's really high on my list. This is called The Comfort Crisis. The Comfort Crisis was recommended to me by my sister. It's one of her favorite books ever. She reads it at least once a year, every year, for years now. I got it. I have now read it multiple times. I also have the audiobook. I say I have the ebook and the audiobook. I still don't have the physical book, and I really want it, but it's hard to find if I'm here, here in Taiwan. It's hard to find it. Somebody that can ship it to me. But this is called The Comfort Crisis: Embrace Discomfort to Reclaim Your Wild, Happy, Healthy Self. This is by Michael Easter. Very, very, very good. And again, especially just for life in general, and kind of an understanding of just how resilient humans are and just how much play you have. I think me trying to sell it, I can't do it justice. You just kind of have to read it, but it could be a life-changing book. That's very, very good. This other one of my all-time favorites, this book I have recommended to people endlessly, and I don't know if anybody has ever actually bought it on my recommendation or read it or listened to the audiobook, but this is one of the most fundamentally important books that I wish everybody read. It could literally save your life. It will improve your life. It's so thoroughly good, and it's important, and it's just full of rich information. This is called The Great Cholesterol Myth, Revised and Expanded: Why Lowering Your Cholesterol Won't Prevent Heart Disease, and the statin-free plan that will. Now, that title, I know, sounds clickbaity. I know it sounds like they're trying to do this this secret thing, the one secret trick nobody ever thought about. It's not that. To give you an example, the book is by Johnny Bowden, PhD, CNS, Stephen D. Sinatra, MD, Michael R. Edis, MD, forward by Mary Dan Edis, MD. Let me see. It's the audiobook version is narrated by Roger Wayne, but that's just the names they have as a by. They reference so many other experts. They get into so much. God, they do such a good job of combining the knowledge of basically all of our knowledge, all of our combined knowledge globally for decades now on this subject of heart health, physical health, all-cause mortality. Now, obviously, cholesterol is one of the things they focus on, but just generally speaking, and it's not just anecdotal stuff. They get into specific studies. They get into how they educate you as a reader how to read scientific studies. Like it really lifts the veil of mystery off of so much of this stuff. This has had a huge impact on my life and has actually improved my health quite a bit since I read it the first time. But it's called The Great Cholesterol Myth, and it could literally save your life. So that's highly recommended. Skip that stuff. A little honorable mention is by Matthew McConaughey. It's called Green Light. I'm not going to hover on that too much. It's barely on the list, but I got that off as kind of a goof, like it's a Matthew McConaughey book. I was shocked by how good it was and how much I really enjoyed it. I've actually now read it. I've listened to the audiobook version, which is narrated by Matthew McConaughey. I've listened to the audiobook version probably 4 or 5 times. It's really, really good, and it's very eye-opening. Now, this one is a big, big, definite recommend. This is also another book. It has to do with health in general, but it's also fascinating. This one's called Spark. Spark, the revolutionary new science of exercise and the brain. Again, unfortunate title, because when they say revolutionary new science, it sounds clickbaity, but this just focuses it on specifically. It specifically focuses on this one specific category, this one niche of how physical exercise affects brain health. And again, it's enlightening, it's eye-opening, it's fascinating. I cannot recommend it enough. Really, really thoroughly good book. It's just called Spark. Another one I'm listening to right now in this moment is called Visual Learning, I believe is what it's called. Visual Learning. Visual Learning is by Temple Grandin, and it's one of the books that I have enjoyed surprisingly amount. It's the first time I listened to the audiobook. I don't like the narration very much. The narrator's a little bit annoying, unfortunately. But the information in the book and the way it explains things is, again, it's fascinating. It's enlightening. But also, I was shocked just at how much it felt like she was explaining my own mind to me. I know everybody wants to pretend like they're a snowflake. Everybody wants to be different and special, and I'm not trying to do that. But I very much have always felt this very strange disconnect from the kind of world around me. Like I was just thinking about things fundamentally in a way that nobody else was. And it seems like other people could very easily get along with certain ideas that just I was like did not compute with me, or certain things just came naturally and were so easy for me that everybody else acted like was some sort of weird magic. And to me, I didn't understand what the big deal was. It's just everybody knows this, right? It's just common sense. This is just normal, and it has to do with these different types of thinking. And one type of thinking is a category is called visual thinking, and then in that category there are different subcategories of different types of visual thinkers. But as she started getting into all that, and she's breaking these things down and giving real world examples and showing how these types of thinkers, where they end up kind of migrating in the workforce and the impact they make in society based on their specific skills and this and that. It was amazing how much it resonated with me and how much it felt like it was the first time I ever read in a book. In this case, I was listening to the audiobook, but it was the first time I ever felt connected. Like, I know this is an overused expression, but it felt like I was being seen. Like, yes, this exactly. I didn't know anybody else like that their brain fired in this way. And I was suddenly seeing it for the first time. So aside from the fact that you might be able to connect with it, more importantly, as a father, I am so happy I've read this book, and I've been pushing it on my wife big time. I wish that more educators, more teachers would read a book like this, that more parents would read a book like this for the sake of their children. It was just an unbelievably eye-opening book. I'm even reading it again right now. I'm reading it. I'm listening to the audiobook now. Every time I go up to the workshop to do any work right now, or I'm cleaning up around the gym, I'm listening to that book. Again, this is probably the 8th time just this year I've listened to the audiobook. Very, very good. Cannot recommend it enough. It's called Visual Thinking. It's by Temple Grandin, and I highly recommend it. And to get that stuff out of the way, the thing that probably resonates more with people on this channel potentially is training books. What, aside from all the studies or anecdotal firsthand knowledge I have, what I've tried, what works, what I've learned from people. I've mentioned before that growing up, I've been very fortunate, just in right place at the right time, that I have met and known a lot of big names in the fitness industry. I learned a lot from them. I learned a lot just from how my mind works and figuring things out on my own, and from reading books and from research studies and great YouTube videos by great YouTubers. But some books that I keep coming back to because they seem to be so good. There are a million books out there related to fitness that I just roll my eyes at because they're just such crap. But these are the books that I have found have been worth every penny. They have an unbelievable wealth of knowledge, and you can learn a lot from them. And I recommend them to people, not because they're going to change your whole life potentially. I mean, they might, but I'm not saying that you need to take every single word in the book as gospel and do exactly what the plan is that they say. Because again, two different people can have the exact same information and arrive at two completely different conclusions. So you might not agree with the conclusions that some of these people have reached, but the information that they're giving you is unbelievably well backed and legitimate and solid. And it's amazing. You can use these to read as enjoyment because it's interesting, but you can also use these as research books. Like you can actually sit. I have spent so many hours here at my desk with these books open, and I'm reading different things, and I'm taking notes, and I'm comparing things later, and I'm using it as like a study guide, and then I'm comparing it to things online. And what does this paper say? Well, I mean, I'm going to look at that study they referenced. They said it was this study done by these people. I'm going to look that up. I'm going to see what it says. I mean, it's just the information is so good. So, first one, again, this is a Chinese version, which I'm not doing so well with, but the English version hopefully will be here at some point. I, of course, have the English version as an ebook, and I also have the audiobook, but it's just old school starting strength. The reason why I want to start with this is because this is a book that I have heard about. People have talked about starting strength. Everybody knows about starting strength. It has been recommended to me generically for probably 15 years at least. I mean, I started hearing about this book like way back before I came to Taiwan, anything. Like, oh, have you heard about starting strength? And the unfortunate thing is that I intentionally avoided it. I refused to read this book because of the negative reputation attached to Mark Rippetoe. Mark Rippetoe had become kind of a meme, and he still is, where so much of what I thought about Mark Rippetoe was based on what everybody says about him. It's based on common knowledge about Mark Rippetoe. The jokes made about him, everyone says that all he does is fives, all he does is compound movements, all he does, that he thinks everything is this. Like, people will twist and distort his words so much, or his training programs, to the point where everything is oversimplified. So many things that have been quoted, from Mark Rippetoe, shit he never said. I just thought he was just some old stubborn meathead with a very narrow view on training that was very, very outdated. And I'm not going to read a book by him. Like, oh, but it's great. Like, nah, I think I'm past that. I don't need to read starting strength. Maybe if I had never lifted a weight before, it'd be okay, but I'm beyond this. And then I actually read it, and this is not even the complex book. This is a very simple book that's very accessible to anybody at any level to kind of understand the basics. And I was stunned at how much of this book I 100% agree with. Like, stuff I have found to be true just from firsthand experience over my training for the past 20 plus years. What I know to be true from individual experience of like reading research papers and all these various studies and all this stuff from other books, like, the information, you might not agree with all the conclusions he comes to, but the information in this book is very, very solid. And what's better is that Mark is actually pretty good, that if information is updated and one of his previous beliefs is proved to be wrong, he will update his beliefs, and he will update the book, and he will revise it and include the more up-to-date, better information. This is the 3rd edition. So as basic and old school as it is a very solid book to have in your collection. The next, Olympic Weightlifting, a complete guide for athletes and coaches. This is by Greg Everett, 3rd edition. Very good book, very thorough. Obviously, you'd think, how much is there to know, but there's quite a bit. I'll just say that this is a very solid, very good book. Even if you are not an Olympic weightlifter, reading about these things and understanding this stuff can kind of give you a better understanding. It spills over to other things pretty well. Now, I'm only touching on that briefly because I want to spend more time talking about the other book attached to this. It's not directly attached. I attach because they're both weightlifting books. But the one that I love and I've read many times and I recommended endlessly is this older book called The System. The system, Soviet periodization, adapted for the American strength coach. Now, it has nothing to do with being patriotic or not, or what your political views are. The USSR had a lot of problems, obviously, but they did a lot of things right. So, for example, when it came to understanding strength training and getting results, it was fundamentally different than the way that these things are done in the United States. The way that research is done in the United States and most of the Western world is you have an individual scientist or lab who's, and this is a gross oversimplification, I'm going to get some of it wrong, but hopefully you know what I'm saying. Individual scientist or lab or whatever who is hoping they want to study something or look at something, and they're picking topics based on what they think they can get funding for. There will be a lab that suddenly decides that they're going to do a study on the effects of Coca-Cola versus, I don't know, unfiltered water. And the conclusions they come to miraculously is that, Coca-Cola actually has all these great benefits. If you wouldn't, you know it. That's shocking information, but it's in the science right here. And then in fucking fine print somewhere, you go down the rabbit hole, you realize it was funded by Coca-Cola. They were paying for the research study, so they got the favorable results they wanted, that they paid for. The Soviet system, the way they did things for the USSR was you could have a central government in Moscow, for example, have every single leading expert. They can pick and choose all of the leading experts when they have a huge pool to choose from, too. They have a society that is unbelievably passionate about mathematics and science and engineering and things like that for their own reasons anyway. And then they were pushed even more to get into that stuff after World War II because of the Cold War and the space race and all these things. And now you have this unbelievably large pool of some of the greatest scientists in the world. And you're saying, I need literally picking what are the leading experts in the world at these types of things, plus guys that are from totally different areas of knowledge. Just maybe they can figure something out. Maybe they'll see something that the other guys don't see. You have all of this, such a huge variety. You have all this stuff working across this enormous continent with all this money and all these people and all this information, all this research, all filtering up to one common goal. So of course, you end up reaching conclusions faster. You end up getting more reliable conclusions. You end up with, that's the why they were able to do so many things so quickly and so reliably and so well. It's just the system as a whole worked better. In the Western world, typically you have different small groups working against each other, trying to take each other out, trying to prove they're the best so they can be the ones that get the funding. Whereas in the USSR, it was everybody works together for the common goal. And one of the results was that the knowledge that they gained, because the money and the time and the effort they put into understanding the human body and exercise science and just every single variable you could ever imagine. It's why old Soviet lifters, or just athletes in general, some of the best in the world, even by today, still to this day, some of those records have never been beaten. They have to change weight classes and change categories so they can have new records because you can't beat the old ones. And some people will negatively say, oh, well, it's because they just use steroids, but that's a very childish view. These days, I think most people realize everybody uses steroids, especially at that level. The Americans back then and every other team in the world was using steroids. They're very open about it. It's in the history books. But the reality is that they just didn't have the same knowledge. Their training wasn't as sophisticated. Their understanding wasn't as thorough. So because of that, the Soviets dominated the Americans 99% of the time. And it wasn't just in weightlifting. It was in basically any athletic endeavor. And the system is that. It is actually taking a look at all of the information that was obviously simplified and boiled down to relevant stuff. But the stuff related to weightlifting is an example that was figured out during the Cold War, during that time of Soviet dominance in weightlifting. and it gets very, very technical, and it gets very thorough. And I have taken so many notes and compared so many things, and I've made my own graphs based on this stuff, and it's unbelievably beneficial to read this, especially if you hope to advise other people or just have a better understanding, because the knowledge does spill over to other things. But this is called The System, and this is a very, very good book. And then the last book on this topic I will talk about, and this is again a Mark Rippetoe book, but this actually gets into the nuts and bolts and is much more in depth. This is called Practical Programming for Strength Training, 3rd edition, by Mark Rippetoe and Andy Baker. This is the one that blew my mind, because I'm not going to go crazy with this, but what I will say is that there were things that Mark Rippetoe was saying in this book, was mentioning in this book, that, how do I say this? There are certain key terms that he uses, certain specific processes in the body that they're involved with gaining muscle, that I have read about. I had read about 10, 15 years ago, probably 10 or 12 years ago, more precisely, that I had memorized, and I had been quoting to myself, and I had been referencing to myself and checking my own notes and telling other people about for years. And what was always bothered me a little bit was that it seemed like I was the only one who knew these things, which is that's not a good sign. It doesn't make me special. It means that maybe I'm a fucking idiot, because I know that I read these research papers. I know that I did my own research. I didn't just read one research paper and say, yep, that's the fact. I cross-referenced things for years. I read multiple studies. I compared things. I looked at anecdotal evidence. I came to understand certain very niche things to be factual. And initially I felt like very proud of myself. Like, oh, well, you guys don't even know about this. I was kind of arrogant about it. But as time went on and the years passed, and I was meeting people who literally had PhDs in this stuff, and I do not have a PhD in this, even they were not using some of these terms. Even they were not referencing some of these more niche processes. I started to become more and more doubtful. Like, why is it that nobody, literally nobody, even guys who are experts in this field, they have their PhD in this, and like, why is it that nobody else has mentioned? I'm literally the only person talking about this, and I'm starting to like wonder if I'm crazy. Like, is what I'm saying wrong? Like, I know I read this stuff. I know I did my research. I know I cross-referenced everything, but you'd think that 10 years later, I would hear somebody talking about this stuff if it was legit or if it was important. And then suddenly, when I was reading this book, for literally the first time ever, I suddenly saw Mark Rippetoe talking about those exact processes, naming these exact mechanisms, these processes, all this stuff. Like, not only was it fascinating and eye-opening, but it was also the most like, take a deep breath. Oh, thank God I'm not an idiot. Like, I knew it. I not only did I know it, yes, I've been validated, because then he goes into mentioning the research and everything else and validating the stuff in the book. But it also then made me have so much more respect for Mark Rippetoe, like, and the amount of research that he does, because again, I've spent 12 years talking about some of this very niche, unknown, kind of underground information that's so minute, it's so little, it's so in the weeds that nobody seemed to know it but me, and I was actually starting to get self-conscious about it. And now Mark Rippetoe's talking about it. He knows about it, and he's going in depth about it. And he's even going so in depth and expanding on it so much that now I'm learning more about this thing that I thought only I knew, which again just gives me more respect for him. Like, dude, Mark Rippetoe is legit. He actually does a painstaking amount of research, apparently, because he has mentioned so many things that quite literally nobody else talks about. I'm not getting into how controversial Mark Rippetoe can be, but what I am going to say is that this is a very, very good book. It's not that this is the best book ever written, but it is very, very thorough. It gets to a lot of great detail. it has a great balance of the actual research and the science, and also just anecdotal. Like, here's some real world examples to give you, and here's a good way to think about it, so that the knowledge sticks in your head better. So, Practical Programming for Strength Training, unbelievably good book. But in the past year, these are the books that I have found myself continuing to pick back up and either read in full all over again, or at least reference and open up and find a specific passage and quote. These are very, very good books. So anyway, thank you for watching. Thank you for being patient. This was a long-winded one, but I appreciate it. And other than that, thank you for watching, and I will talk to you later.